where does he start? What's the purpose of this document in the law? So he's trying to figure out whether or not we can do philosophy. Whether or not, as a Muslim, you can do philosophy. Al-Ghazali, right, has written a book a couple generations previously that has been sort of a long assault on philosophy. Because again, what's the fundamental position of the religions, right? Judaism, Christianity, Islam? They want you to have faith overall. Whereas philosophy says you need to be asking questions. And these two things conflict. And what's happening largely is that, by the way, the faith camp will win until the 1700s. Well, Ibn Rushd loses. Spoiler alert, this whole project does not work, right? It does not work. They literally were still hanging people for wrong religious beliefs in the 1800s in Spain. The last person killed for heresy in Europe was killed in the 1800s. So let's get his first argument on the board. The first argument goes like this. Teleological study of the world is philosophy, and if the law commands such a study, origination, where do things come from? Why are things the way they are? All teleology asks. What is the purpose of things? Is actually a better translation. If studying what the purpose of things is philosophy, and if the law commands that study, then the law commands philosophy. Logically speaking, how it works. All right, so the law commands the study. And if the study is just equal to philosophy, then the law commands philosophy. How do we do philosophy? So if we have a commandment to do this, we have to ask a basic question. Right? If this is proved, which I think it is, at least according to his logic, we have a basic question of how. How we do it through demonstrative reasoning. And the only way to do demonstrative reasoning is through logic. Logic is telling the truth without providing contradictions. Because if you produce a contradiction, one side of the contradiction must be true, and the other one must be false. That's why you can't have contradictory truths. It can't be the door is open and closed at the same time. How do we do it? Demonstrative reasoning. He set this whole thing up with logic. So this is one argument that he's made. What's the religious argument that he made? How do we know from the law that we're supposed to study it? It doesn't really matter in some sense for this argument where the law comes from. If you're a Muslim, you have to say the Quran. If you're a Christian, it has to come from the Bible. If you're a Sikh, it comes from Guru Nanak or whatever. So this is just for Ibn Rushd, right? He uses the verses from the Quran to show this. Counter-arguments. Let's do his two counter-arguments. If God wanted us to follow philosophy, then it should have been in the Quran. It's not in the Quran, therefore we don't do it. Yeah, so the idea here is if God wanted us to do philosophy, God would have just included it in the Quran. The first counter-argument I think is relatively obvious. There's all kinds of things that aren't religious texts. We do them anyway. So the first argument is this whole thing, not original argument. It's not there in the Quran or it's not there in the Bible, therefore you shouldn't do it. The second argument is that the religion is for common people and that if you use logic on this text, it produces contradictions. And if it produces contradictions, you have to take one side or the other. And Ibn Rushd is going to say you have to take which side? Philosophy. And the counter-argument here is, if you follow that out, what does that do to the religion? Yeah, it just breaks the whole religion. So what their argument here is, if we let people use philosophy, it will undermine religion. I bet you've heard an argument like that about science. You believe in evolution. Why would you believe in this? There's a worry that if you go down the path of logic, you will become an atheist. They're not wrong. This second counter-argument is not wrong. This does happen to people. Now, just because it happens to people, does that mean we should abandon philosophy completely? Yeah, or abandon religion, right? This is going to be Ibn Rushd's argument. Yeah, just because somebody choked on water once doesn't mean the water's bad. Just because philosophy made some people into heretics or atheists doesn't mean it's bad. Ibn Rushd's project, even though it lost in the short term, it won in the long term. Now, I bet many of you have never even heard of Ibn Rushd before you walk into this room. But this just goes to show you, right, that the history of ideas is actually very complicated. That we often don't know why we think we do and how intellectually we got to where we got as a culture. And it can begin somewhere, a culture completely different than your own. Arabic, Muslim culture in the Middle Ages. And yet you end up thinking thoughts like that. It's this argument that he launches a counterattack. He's going to divide the world up into really three different groups. He's going to divide the world in three groups. So let's get these groups up here, right? We're on the left-hand side of 292. One of them comes through it through demonstration, one through dialectical arguments, we'll talk about this in a minute, and the other two rhetorical arguments. Do you know what rhetoric is? It has everything to do with convincing people of things. Rhetoric is about convincing. It literally just comes from the Greek word which means to speak eloquently. You've all been to a religious setting, whether it's a preacher or an imam or a rabbi. Now he's trying to convince you of the truth of the religion in order to actually help you out. He's sins is where you won't go to hell. Well, he's not doing philosophical stuff like this. He's going to be up there just telling what? Story. A narrative. Because what's most convincing is stories. A woman came to Jesus and she had a problem and Jesus healed her and he didn't do it because of anything other than he loved her. And therefore you should do what to your neighbor? Be good. Just like Jesus. This is the thing. At this level, it's about convincing people of things. Poor, uneducated people who can't read and write, Ibn Rushd thinks that the Quran and the Gospel is written actually for this group. Technically sophisticated people don't need stories to convince them of things, but common people do. There's a difference between being uneducated and being bad. He just says they're uneducated. They can't help that. They're never going to be different than that. It's just the way that they are. And so God, in God's mercy, God didn't give it in some technical philosophical way. He gave it in this way. Thank you, God. That's the first group, the rhetorical argument. Convince you of stuff. The next argument up, this is a higher level, a bit more abstract. When he says dialectical, right, what he really means here are people who are able to debate the scriptures, study them, know different parts of them, compare them, and then debate their meaning. Now, this represents not the majority. The majority of people just believe stuff. A smaller amount of people can actually debate the scriptures themselves. These are the imams and the rabbis and the preachers of the congregations getting together. Now, number one, demonstrative reasoning. Here, now we're in the world of philosophy. We know, for instance, in the Quran and in the Bible, it says God made the heavens and the earth. Well, the question is, when did God make the heavens and the earth? How did God make the heavens and the earth? Does the text tell us how it got made? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. It doesn't tell us how. So no amount of debating Scripture is going to settle that question for you. You can't go to the Scriptures and say how it got made. It's not clear how it got made. You know it got made. You know that God's responsible. You believe in the text, but you're not sure how. Then the only way to try to figure out is look at the world and try to reason our way back from the world that we live in to discover how it got made. We do that now, by the way. It's called science. This is where Ibn Rushd gets a ton of trouble. To this day, this passage in Ibn Rushd is still heavily debated and rejected by many scholars, especially in the Islamic world. Now, since this religion is true and summons to the study that which leads to the knowledge of the truth, we, the Muslim community, know definitely that demonstrative study does not lead to conclusions conflicting to Scripture. For truth does not oppose truth, but accords with it and bears witness to it. Truth does not contradict truth. But if the apparent meaning of Scripture conflicts with demonstrative conclusions, it must be interpreted allegorically. That's a little dense, but does anyone see what he's saying here? Because he thinks you can find when there's actual stories in the text that are true and when they're allegories. If the text contradicts philosophy, you know it's an allegory. The only way to know where the allegories are is to use philosophy and prove truths. Then you compare it to the religious text, and when the religious text contradicts the philosophy, you now know where the allegories are. For the folks who are going to be in the number one category, what traits are going to have to have? What traits do they have to have? Religious integrity, moral virtue, and natural intelligence. And this is the core of his argument. In fact, when he says that whole truth doesn't oppose truth, he's actually quoting Aristotle. Also how we're required to study it, but also how we're able to study it and not commit heresy, and also not confuse them and mislead them. Who should study it? Only people with these qualities. And how should they study it? Using demonstrative reasoning. Problem in demonstrative reasoning. And this is going to be an example of what Ibn Rushd is talking about. I want to summarize it very briefly. There are two positions about how the world was made. This is a problem that dominates the Middle Ages. We cannot solve this problem by debating scriptures, because the scriptures don't tell us how the world was made. The only way to solve it is by doing philosophy. Two positions emerge. They say that if you look at the world is just a series of causes and effects. Now, are there any effects that don't have causes? It doesn't make any sense that there would be an effect with no cause. They're logically bound to each other. If there are no effects without causes, how long have cause and effect by nature existed? Infinity. When cause and effect goes back for infinity, how old is the world? It's infinitely old. Therefore, the world is eternal. Now, what's the problem with this position with Scripture? In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Right? If God made the world, there was a period in which the world didn't exist. Counter-argument number one. It goes against Scripture. The second argument, how far back is infinitely long ago plus 1 hour? You can't add an hour to infinitely long ago. And you can keep throwing time into the infinity, you never get to the beginning, and therefore if you never get back to the beginning, and you keep adding time to it, you never get to the present. The proof here, right, is that if there is a present, the past can't be infinity. Because if the past were infinite, you would never be here. But there are no effects without causes. Now, if you don't want to go down the route, right, that the world was infinite, you have to say that it was created. Now, the upshot of this is, this agrees with Scripture, right? If we believe the world was created, we've just now admitted there's a kind of prime mover. It has to be created from either something or it has to be created from nothing. If it's created from something, back to what something was that, what something was that, and what something was that, which leads us back to number 1, it being infinite. But if it was created from nothing, think about that for a minute. It seems to agree with Scripture, but it doesn't seem to make any sense. So it's scriptural, but it's not logical. Notice we have between these two things we have a basic problem. Number 1, yeah, it's logical but not scriptural. Number 2 is scriptural but not logical. Now, for all the philosophers, we know that Scripture disagrees with philosophy. Go with philosophy. Should we go with number 1? All through the middle of this text is this debate about the eternality of the world. It was a huge problem. It's still a problem, by the way. What is Averroes going to say? He's going to go with philosophy. He's going to say that the world is eternal. Al-Ghazali is going to go with Scripture and say the world is not eternal, created from nothing. There can't be two truths here, right? Ibn Rushd knows that in this debate, what's been happening in Islam and in Christianity too, is that one side comes to a position and declares the other side an unbeliever. They clash, they fight, they kill each other. Both of these arguments produce counter-arguments. Both of these seem like reasonable, but neither of them we have definitive proof of one or the other. Not yet. If there's any entity at all that knows the answer to this question, it's going to be the Creator, because the Creator will know whether or not it's infinite or not. What you're really saying is, only it's the best proof yet. Now, if we have to admit that I don't quite know, you can't tell me I'm wrong. All you can tell me is, your arguments aren't as good as my arguments. Now, just because your arguments are better doesn't mean that I'm wrong. It just means your arguments are better. Maybe I'll get better arguments too. Rush says, because this issue is reserved in some sense ultimately for God, it means two simultaneous things. One, it means that we're allowed to study it, but it doesn't mean we're going to find the answers. No, because only God knows the answers. We have the obligation to do philosophy, and when we do it, I can't say, you're a heretic, you're kuffar, you're bad. Our task is not to complete it, neither is it our luxury to not do it. We have to do it knowing we'll never do it perfectly, but we have to maintain the humility to know that you might disagree with me, you might disagree with her, she might disagree with him, but the disagreement is actually useful, but calling each other heretics is not. Religious hegemony. It's opening up the possibility of disagreeing with religious thought without being killed for it. That whole secular we've been talking about, it begins here. But notice how he's done it. He's done it by using philosophy and religion, separate them off from each other so that one philosophy can have room to breathe. This opens up the possibility that the vast majority of religion is for common people, and up here among scholars, they can at least disagree with each other without being heretic, killed for it. Eventually it'll open up so wide that we'll say, not only should their disagreement be allowed, we should make it so that no one can kill anybody for their religious belief. It's going to open up the door for people to believe all kinds of things, and no one can be condemned. And that's going to make many conservative people want to hold on. The people who believe they're the most right are the people who want to be questioned the least. One of the things he says you cannot doubt, under any means, there's no debate about it, is you have to